Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video is going to cover the start of episode 4, parts 1 and 2. I slightly talk ahead because of how I'm recording these and a point that sort of overlapped. Content warnings in this section for discussions of child abuse. The discussions themselves are quite tame and at a remove, I think, but do know that is going to frequently be coming up in multiple topics and will be a recurring theme of chapter 4 quite often. But I will point out here, there will be spoilers for the entirety of the game in this video. Don't watch if you haven't played or read all of Umineko. Even if you don't care about spoilers, you won't really follow what I'm talking about. We begin with an interesting little vignette where we once again see everyone arriving at the airport and all sorts of shenanigans and fun happening there. And it is interesting to me how immediately it is set up, how Ange is separated from her family because of the tragedy of Rokkanjima, that she is not able to engage with any of this fun. She has been left out, which to me parallels Beatrice in that though Beatrice was able to be physically present on the island for all of these family gatherings, she was nevertheless unable to participate. The magical setup of this opening has Ange present but at a remove. She is unable to interact. Battler kind of bumps into her, but there's no engagement or interaction. Even though physically they touch, it is not the same as being able to say hello to the brother she has lost. And that kind of alienation is obviously very key to who Ange is ongoing, that even if she is technically around people, she is distinctly alienated. And I think this is a plot thread that I found a little jarring the first time I read Umineko, because I was reading both this and Maria's backstory in this episode and going, this is depressing. Which I do understand as part of the story, but also it feels like this is building a lot of sudden track out of nowhere, because up until now Ange had not been a significant presence, and suddenly building her in was a little bit confusing to me. Obviously it's because Ange becomes a bigger and more important character through the end of the answer arcs. She ends up kind of being the emotional core of the ending. But also, I think this is meant to give a view to the ways in which Beatrice did not have a chance to be a member of the Ashurmia family, or alternatively Lion did not have that opportunity. That despite the happy fun times we see Battler have with his siblings and his aunts and uncles and his parents, there is still a remove that does not make it easy family to integrate into. We have seen Battler's perspective on the, oh, they're kind of awful rich people, but also it's my family and I care about them. And we're now getting a flip side where Ange has no family. Ange has the opposite perspective to Battler. She is much more pessimistic. She is much more suspicious and paranoid and believing in the worst interpretations of events. And the flip in tone is quite strong and significant, especially in that you get a snapshot of the old tone and then just suddenly do a 180. But I think it's also good in establishing why that is, because even if Battler had left his family for a time, he had the option to return and just have this good family time, whereas Ange just had that fully taken away from her. From her perspective, again, I have a slightly more sympathetic read of Eva, and I feel like Ange did have a family she could attempt to engage with, but she rejected that option, because to her, her family was taken away, and she would not accept anything else. We will circle back to Ange, but next we have, what again, on my first reading I found a bizarre tonal shift where Beatrice and Runaway and Battler have a little sitcom moment where Runaway gives Beatrice the impression that Battler is distraught after her previous victory, And that is where I expected things to be because of the way in which in episode 3, Beatrice establishes a rapport with Battler and then breaks it. And in my head, that meant that he would be either, again, distraught the way he was at the end of episode 2, or a renewed fighting spirit. In a weird way, it is almost neither, in that he's actually quite calm, and he's like, well, yeah, we were playing a game, and like dirty tricks are part of the game. Sort of. It's an interesting dynamic where he doesn't have bad feelings over it. Beatrice is worried that he will, which I think is a very reasonable thing to think in this moment. But the fact that he doesn't is an interesting relationship dynamic shift that's happening here. Because he says it's fine, he says they can move on, he says, I'll just have to remember we're enemies and nothing more. Which is not actually what Beatrice wants, which is why Beatrice tries to be like, ho ho ho, what a fun trick. And then he's like, no, I am not joking. I am laying a ground rule and I'm laying down a boundary. We're not doing that one again. You're not going to trick me like that. And Beatrice takes a moment to get the hint, because when Battler comes off as everything being fine, she takes that to mean that she did nothing wrong and does not need to think about her actions and any notions. But then when he makes the concerted point to her, she's like, oh, okay, there's real shit happening here. I can't really process that, so I will make a joke, even though I am listening to the thing you have said. I'm very curious to see how this plays out in the rest of the episode, because there is still a clear bit of a mismatch where Beatrice wants them to be more than opponents, but she is most comfortable playing the role of an opponent. Battler has decided to not acknowledge any other role outside of that, but we know, from having played further into the game, that in fact she is we know from having played further into the game that in fact they are going to re-establish a much closer relationship. And the difference being that the one being established in episode 3 was more of a front. I retain my read that I think there was some sincerity in what Beatrice was saying, that it was not fully fabricated, that she did learn lessons about love, even if the way she acted was playing up some genuine feelings. But also, I think the more sincere connection they can form has to come from Beatrice being a more natural-ish version of herself. Umineko has a lot to say about the fact that there's not a singular true person, but I think there is a difference between a very put-upon face and the connection Battler can make with a Beatrice who is sincere while still having her antagonistic persona. Because it is still a persona, it just may be a persona that she is more comfortable with and enjoys embodying and feels sincere. Again, there's no red truth for personality. This is just feels accurate. And the other thing about this that I think is a little bit clever in retrospect is that Ryukishi is saying here, don't worry, I as the author am not doing this twice. Because you will later feel real sympathy for Beatrice, and I'm not going to do all of episode 7 and then end it with, actually she's still evil, this was all a lie. Because this was one of the things I felt coming out of episode 3, that I believe I said in a previous spoiler video anyway, but that can't have all been an act, because the idea that you would spend a whole episode having a character's development and emotional relationships change on screen and then end the episode going, yeah, none of that happened though, would just be such a strange waste of screen time. It would be such a strange way of undermining your own story if you genuinely meant that none of that was true and were instead making a point about what is and is not true, what is and is not a real person, what is a fake false face, and also simultaneously talking about different interpretations of characters and stories. But at the same time, you also just want to know that you're not going to have the rug pulled out from under you yet again the way it happened to Battler. Battler not recognizing Ange I guess tangentially springs off from that last point, is funny because in the one sense you do understand that he saw her as a 6-year-old last. So an 18-year-old Ange probably looks quite different, even if she has some reminiscent looks, and the way she is drawn and the way she's dressed and does her hair, it does kind of look immature in a kind of Arrested Development sense, where she probably doesn't look massively different in certain ways, but also Battler is talking to her when he would expect her to be 6, but it's been 12 years for her, so magic shit is going on, but also Battler should know by now that magic shit is going on. There's a strange kind of denial almost, where he's not willing to acknowledge the obvious conclusion. She calls herself Gretel. He is Hansel. He is the boy being eaten by a witch that she's rescuing. He doesn't get it. Battler is a bit of a dumbass, but I think this should be within his capacity to understand. And I think this is actually a case of him accepting a fiction someone is giving him and not looking into it. She never actually says she's Ange. There's an interesting beat where he obviously realizes it pretty early and he says, "Ange? Could you?" Her response is, "If I were to say that's right, would you believe me?" And she spins a thread where she never says she is not Ange. She will later say she's Gretel, but that does not preclude her ability to be Ange. And she effectively talks him into accepting a story that she is not Ange. And I don't think he's convinced so much as he thinks, yes, I will and should believe this. Which is an interesting microcosm of Beatrice's existence that he is not yet willing to acknowledge, but there's much more antagonistic reasons for that. Whereas this is just a tiny moment of going, okay, I will accept that you are Gretel. There is an ambiguity of, if I really dug deeper, I could probably, even if not necessarily prove that you're Ange, convince myself that you're Ange if I really poked at it. But I will choose not to, especially because of the ways I have been tricked by magical things recently that I can't be sure of this, so I will accept what you have told me, and I will accept your truth of the situation. I also like, when discussing combat tactics here, Ange says, "Just now, Battler described fighting you as closing the distance, but you can't measure distance with a single eye. Only with 2 eyes are things visible in 3 dimensions, and only then can distance be judged. And even when you have 2 fields of vision, it's pointless if they're in the same place. You can pin down witches more accurately when they're far apart." Which I read as a mission statement for what this whole episode is. In this episode, you're getting 3 simultaneous paths of Ange, where you are seeing her in her school days, reading about Maria's history and reacting to it and getting some of her during school daily life. You are seeing her in the future of 1998 as she investigates the witch situation on Rokkenjima, and you are getting her playing the game as a sort of alternative 1998 person. I forget the specifics of how the implication goes later, but I believe there is a point at which Ange is almost shown as having 2 diverging paths, maybe more than 2, honestly, where one of them is taken by Bern Castell to go play this game, the other is the one who jumped off the building and survived the fall, and then went to go look into the Rokkenjima stuff, which we are seeing in the future of 1998. And there may in fact also be a third who doesn't do the deep investigation and is willing to let it go. Pin that for later, because it's definitely not going to come up for multiple episodes. The important thing in this episode is you're getting a complete picture of Ange and her psychology with these separate places, because you're both getting how she feels about the game and her brother and his playing of it. You're getting how she feels about the objective truth of the reality of Rokkenjima and her inability to have a truth to reckon with. And we're getting what kind of life she lived, how she grew up, that would lead to her being alienated and obsessed with this truth that will not change any of her actual conditions of life, but is the goal she has set as a thing to pursue. While also seeing how she is unable to learn the magic Maria applies to her own life. Which is a lot of Ange. As I said, this was a weird curveball for me in episode 4, but it is the only way in which you can get a clear picture of Ange when you've had very little setup before this point, and you now need to fast track explaining who this girl is, why she is, what motivates her, and what she seeks. Next, we get to move on to Ange's school days. And to pick apart an oddly mundane section, I do need to underscore the way in which Ange narrativizes things in her world. When the class leader comes to her asking if she has filled out her questionnaire, if you read their lines might be a little bit sharp, but they're not particularly accusatory or bullying in the way that Ange reads in the lines. Ange's narration supplies the pessimistic tone and take of what is being said, which is not to claim that it is all in Ange's head, but it is to point out the way in which Ange's head always takes this path. There is certainly ways in which maybe Ange should have paid attention to a school thing, or maybe genuinely did lose her questionnaire, or maybe should have asked someone about it. Again, not to insist that she should have solved this herself, but to think about the fact that she fully not just reads it as being because of other people, but that because of the malice of other people, but she treats it, she says, treating it as though it was my own carelessness would settle everything more quickly. Which gets her into a spiral, because she will acknowledge fault openly to the person. She will take all of the blame upon herself, even if maybe it wasn't really her fault. In her head thinking, this wasn't my fault at all though, but I will do this for convenience because I would rather disengage and move on and deal with the situation as minimally as possible. And this just speaks to a larger pattern of how she's operating in school, that certainly seems like there are bully girls, and I think there's going to be more explicit bullying happening later that is not ambiguous, but that is not the same as saying that all of the girls are bullying her the way she perceives. And this even flows into Ange's understanding of events post-Rokkenjima, with Eva taking custody of Ange and insisting upon it. Ange, again, consistently will read Eva as being selfish and self-centered and uninterested in Ange and even hating Ange. I get much more of a read that Eva does care about family and she badly misses her son, and this girl is not a replacement for her son George, who she obviously was deeply loved and had for decades, to then have this young child who was traumatized, was uninterested in Ava's ways and ideas about how to grow up and how to raise children, because we know that Ava was pretty harsh with George. George had the disposition where he was willing to take that and able to meet her expectations enough that he got by. But if you are a child who does not meet those expectations, the way Jessica does not meet her parents' expectations, then you will have a bad time, even without both of you being traumatized. However, Ange sees it more as Ava cares about the family as the family legacy, and not that Ava gives a shit about her as a person. Again, ambiguous. Maybe Eva was that way. Maybe she wasn't. But we don't know that. However, Ange is certain she knows that. And that's part of the key distinction. The way in which Ange has real certainty about her reads and situations. And will only budge if given evidence to the contrary, even though she hasn't, strictly speaking, gotten evidence of her own. And of course, Ange's singular way of reconnecting with her old family, the family she still has affection for, is to read Maria's diary. And this is, again, going to be one of the ongoing threads of this episode. But in particular, I find it interesting as a way in which it's an interesting way to keep a person alive, to revive them, to keep your relationship with them to be a living thing. Because in some ways, it seems like Ange has pretty much read all of Maria's diary at this point. But there was a point after losing Maria that Ange got to understand Maria better by reading her diary and learning more about her. And in a way that allows their relationship to develop even posthumously. And this is a way in which Ange is expressing her magic she is imagining a fully embodied Maria. She is not simply thinking, I'm just reading her notes, I'm reading her history and taking it in. She is in fact actually outright projecting a Maria and talking to her. She at one point says she read it in her diary and says, no, actually Maria told me. Because this to her is real. And this is a rare situation in which she's willing to go beyond her cynicism of objective reality and engage with the magical reality and believe in the magical reality. As a character detail, I also like this a lot because of the way in which, as an adult in late Umineko, she'll be writing children's books to give other children fictional people to relate to like this. Yet again, this is a meta situation of Ryukashi showing how reading a book, reading someone's story can allow you to engage with that person, engage in a dialogue with them, whether or not that person might be a real person being written about, they might be a fictional character, it might be the author themselves if you are thinking of the themes and subtext of their work and imagining the dialogue behind that. And so, Ange later becoming a children's author feels like a very happy and satisfying ending to her learning the lessons of this game, her understanding what magic is and what use it has, and how it is not simply detracting from a real and greater truth. And so we witness the not yet birth of Sakutaro, the introduction of Sakutaro. One thing I like about Sakutaro, especially from the later context, because this is a vibe I picked up on when reading too, the fact that he is not at all a handmade individual toy, but is merely a mass-produced object. But the narrative imbued into this present is that he is one of a kind. He is made for Maria. He himself is proof of Rosa's love for Maria, that despite Rosa being busy constantly, quote-unquote busy, she will set aside time to make Maria a present. That Sakutaro will later be a voice in favor of Rosa. Later, when Maria is getting upset about the neglect and abuse that she is receiving, Sakutaro will be on Rosa's side because he is physical evidence of the love that Rosa has for Maria. It is falsified evidence, if you want to think of it in those terms, because of the lie she has told about the origins of Sakutaro, which is certainly makes Rosa a piece of shit, as do many other things. But at the same time, she does love Maria. She is not a fit parent and should not be able to hold on to her child, but it is not wrong to say she loves Maria. In a sense, this is almost like getting the correct answer to a math problem while doing it incorrectly. If you've taken the wrong steps but still get to the correct result, your steps might be wrong, but the conclusion isn't really. And again, in the kind of overall thoughts of Umineko, is Maria believing Rosa loves her harmful in any way? Because we will see the ineffectual nature of government systems to save Maria, and we will see everyone else being external and unwilling to step in and help her. We've already seen it when she's being literally physically abused on the island. So at the end of the day, if no one is going to help Maria, is her best way to help herself not to take the happiness she can in this situation? Ange, of course, would say, absolutely not, you should hate your mother. This is an awful life to live. Maria, a child with little power in the situation except over how she feels about things, and even then only to an extent, will grasp for evidence she can that her mother loves her and taking that and running with it. And a quick note that it's especially ghoulish that Rosa is not satisfied by saying, oh, I made you this stuffed animal, I hope you like it. Because clearly she said before that she had made it, and then realized she wouldn't have had time, probably literally on the way to this dinner, just bought it somewhere or something. But the ways in which she continues to elaborate, like, oh, I wanted to make something bigger, but I didn't have time. It's like, Rosa, don't push your luck. Just because she's a child who will not second guess you. It just feels worse to me. And speaking of feeling worse to me, it's not a lot to say about this, but I will say, it is extra frustrating that despite Maria having found a coping mechanism that works for her, Rosa still gets frustrated and polices her about it because she's worried about Maria seeming childish. Especially when often her worry about Maria seeming childish is, well, I shouldn't be leaving you alone when you're this young, so I don't like people realizing how young you are when you go to the shop to buy dinner for yourself, so leave that toy at home. Rosa, again, have some cop on. Minor Higurashi spoilers for all of Higurashi, I suppose. I'll put a timestamp on this. Maria has a theory of witches where there is always one sacrificed from a class so that more aren't sacrificed. And again, this is an interesting theory Maria has that echoes some stuff from Higurashi about sacrifices and having a singular target so that everyone else can be happy. But it seems incompatible with Umineko's world, where we've seen before that lots of people are in a chain of victims. People who are perpetrators of abuse are also victims of abuse. There is not a situation where all of the class is perfectly happy because only one is being bullied, especially with, if you think about Ange's school, because we don't get a lot of actual description of Maria's school, but for Ange's school, it sounds like a lot of those kids are probably having a miserable time. It seems like they've all been put in a strict and severe Catholic school for imprisoning rich kids so that they don't mess about, and they are all separated from their families and they're in a toxic environment. I highly doubt that Ange is the only one being bullied, and I certainly don't think that none of the bullies have maybe gotten abuse from their parents in one way or another. So this idea of sacrifice is like a naive hope that I don't think makes any sense. No shade to Maria, the powerful witch she is, but this doesn't really track with what Umineko regularly shows us. Who would you say the 18 people on Rokkenjima could possibly be said to be the one bullied person so that the rest are fine? Frankly, the inverse makes more sense, where you could maybe argue that Kinzo's not particularly oppressed and he is instead visiting it upon everyone else, either directly or indirectly. But we'll get to his backstory later. There's a very minor beat when Maria goes shopping and the man behind the register is like, you probably shouldn't be here by yourself. And Maria's like, it's okay, I'm always by myself. And the guy is like, I'll give you some free soda. He gives her like no one would buy this not very good soda that she also needs to manage to avoid her mother knowing she got so that she doesn't get in trouble. He's given her a burden instead of giving her anything of meaningful help. And I think that is a useful microcosm for understanding the position Maria is in. That a lot of people attempting to do a kindness are really not giving Maria the actual material help she needs. And we're going to see a social worker who turns up when Rose is clearly being an unfit mother, and nothing's going to come of it. And especially after having also read Higurashi, I think that's a very pointed reference. And I think in the same way, this shopkeeper, while attempting to be nice to this little girl, is not doing her any favors, really. It's jumping ahead slightly, but I do want to address it now because of how Ange summons Maria. There's an interesting distinction made where it is said that Ange is summoning Sakutaro from zero. That Ange is not taking something that already exists and magnifying it, which is not that impressive magically speaking, but that Ange is taking something that doesn't exist. There is a sea of zeros, and Ange is plucking something real out of it. Sakutaro is an invented person, a friend that is not based on an old family member, or not based on someone who has moved away, or anything like that. Sakutaro is an invented personality that she created. That is contrasted with Ange is in effect using Maria for the same purpose and in the same way, but Ange is using a wealth of Maria's soul. Things that she knows about Maria anyway from having known her before, and things she has written in her diary. Composited from all of that stuff, Ange has an understanding of Maria as a person that pre-exists Ange's own projection of her. So Ange is creating this projection of Maria, but she is basing it on something, and it is Maria who's inventing it from nothing. And I truly mean nothing because, again, it is heartbreaking to think to Maria this is a projection of the stuffed animal that her mother handmade for her. But that part's not even true. This is a 1 in a million item that Maria has given real life to, that even her mother did not contribute to. And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for watching and for commenting. See you next time.